Good morning. This is the appointed time and we have a quorum. So let's invite the administration in. Well, we'll wait till the administration representatives have taken a seat. So everybody seated. I'll call this meeting to order now. First of all, I thank the deputations and individuals for coming to our meeting, and you may wear the EPs in front of you and choose the channel that you need. Channel 0 is the floor, channel 1 is Cantonese, 2 is English, 3 is 普通话. We do not have many deputations who wish to speak today, so each deputation will have a more relaxed speaking time. The time limit is 5 minutes, and I remind deputations and individuals that your speech and your submission are not protected under the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And I also would like to remind you to pay attention to the various security measures in the matters to know for members of the public attending meetings or sitting in the public gallery of Electoral Complex. And the notice is also in front of you. And if you wish, you can also get a copy of this notice from the security staff here. And if you have prepared speaking notes, please put down your name on the speaking notes, and then before you leave the room, you can give the speaking notes to the staff for our reference. So I'll take a look at the seating plan, and I will now invite Mr. Wong Chairman of the Registered Minor Works Contractors Signatory Association Limited, to speak. The speaking time is 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. In relation to Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017 Cap 102 about Part 5 permit for carrying out waterworks for inside service, my views are this. At the public consultation session held by the Water Supplies Department in October last year, I asked the administration to consider revising the supervisory model for waterworks, and at present it is difficult to inspect the works in private residential units. And point number 3, for maintenance of water pipes from water meter to the residential unit, if we can allow qualified contractors to undertake maintenance and to reimburse the maintenance fee, we can lower the fees and the administration can supervise the work. Point number 4, we have about 20,000 qualified contractors at the moment. And point number 5, there should be an enhanced training course to be introduced by the Water Supplies Department for the authorized person of qualified contractors. And there should a minor works system should be adopted for applying or reporting to the Water Supplies Department on maintenance items so that the cost can be lowered and the owners will understand whether to choose a minor works contractor or plumber to repair the water works at home. And next, Mr. David Lau from Hong Kong Plumbing and Sanitary Ware Trade Association Limited. Our views on this matter, on this bill is this. First of all, we agree with the objective of the bill, that is to allow workers other than licensed plumbers to carry out waterworks. But first of all, be it a skilled, semi-skilled or unskilled worker, or the person as supervisor to a non-skilled worker, we do not agree that such a person should be subject to criminal liability if he contravenes Section 14, subsection 3. Our view is that a worker is not a professional qualification. Well, I'd like to ask the speaker to refrain from cook mixing, or it will be difficult for the interpreters. Well, a worker does not have any professional qualification, and they usually carry out works according to the drawings and materials provided by the employer. They may not understand the law, and they should not be asked to understand the law thoroughly. Although the amendment will bring about greater convenience for the trade, it's unjustified or unfair to ask them to take up this criminal liability. And it will also affect newcomers to the trade, because their mistake may cause them to face criminal prosecution. So it may have a major impact for the trade to attract new blood. New blood may choose to join other trades such as the E&M in other areas. And therefore, our association is of the view that as far as criminal liability is concerned, a worker, regardless of their skill level, should not be subject to criminal prosecution. And it may also be difficult to instigate or institute criminal prosecution in the future. Let's say if the works are completed and if something goes wrong, and if you want to hold any worker liable for, say, making the wrong measurements, using the wrong materials, or using leaded materials, it's really difficult to trace which worker used those raw materials. So first of all, we don't agree that workers should be held criminally liable, and we can foresee the difficulty in enforcing the law. It may not be practical. And if the worker cannot be held liable, then, or if the worker cannot be identified, it's also questionable whether contractors and other parties may be held criminally liable. Point number 3, about non-designated worker. Section 15, subsection 3, it provides that if a person who is not a designated worker is found working on site, carrying out waterworks, then the person will be committing an offense, and the contractor employing that worker will be committing an offense. There is this term, permitting, and we'd like to know whether the plumbing contractor is criminally liable for allowing the worker or permitting the worker to work on site. Because usually the contract would be subcontracted to a subcontractor, although it's stipulated in the contract that no such person should be employed, I want to know whether this is an offense available to the main contractor, and also whether licensed plumbers would be subject to criminal prosecution as well. Point number 4. The bill proposes changing the time limit to 6 months after discovery of offense. To the date of offense. Well, your time is up, sorry. Mr. Wong Ping-fai, the first deputation to speak, has arrived. He represents the Waterworks Mechanics Alumni. Good morning. Sorry I was late. In relation to the Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017, I have the following views. Well, I'm chairman of the Alumni. We set up in 2006. We have 730 members, and especially we have 400 licensed plumbers. In relation to the Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017, we support it. We believe that it will more effectively regulate workers apart from licensed plumbers, but we believe that some improvements should be made to enhance the bill's efficiency or effectiveness. Clause 6 amends Section 14 in relation to the construction of plumbing works on a fire surface and on an inside surface. The proposal is to repeal the subsection 1, and then, unless specified in subsection 2, the installation, alteration, demolition of what the waterworks installation should be applied in writing in advance. Well, for written permission, we call it Part 3 in our application procedure. The permit should be issued by the Water Supplies Department before works can be carried out. But at the moment, it takes 2 or 3 months from the time of submission of the application until its approval. And by the time the Water Supplies Department issues approval for Part 3, it takes 2 months. So all in all, it takes 4 months before workers in our trade can actually carry out the works. For new developments, I don't think it's a problem, but for the general public who needs water supply and commercial buildings, I don't think it is fair. So my suggestion is to shorten the waiting time by expediting the application process, and the department can approve the applications for materials and the works at the same time to expedite the process. And there should also be a dedicated team set up to vet or approve plans in relation to the F&B industry before the master plan is submitted. So this is my interpretation of Clause 6 amending or Section 14. This is also discussed by our alumni, and also Clause 7 amending Section 17B, registered workers, skilled workers, professional would also be added as designated persons. I agree, because amending Section 15 reflects the current situation of the trade. But for registered plumbing worker or registered plumbing worker provisional, the registration is not supervised by the department. We think that a mechanism should be set up to supervise workers other than the licensed plumber, and that when there is an error, there should be a supervisor to rectify the mistake and penalize those who are in the wrong. And when the Waterworks Ordinance is contravened, the department should be able to penalize the person by suspending or revoking the license according to Section 737.
Next one is Mr. Cheung Chi Wai from the Hong Kong Licensed Plumbing Professionals Association Limited. Chairman, well, actually what I want to say is already put forward to you. So I'm not going to read the submission. I'm sure you can understand it. But on point 4, I've got some changes. As for the, I'd like to add 2 words. Being responsible and monitor. I've shown these wordings to legal advisors. I think if we add those 2 words, then that would be better. I'm the chairman, and after the lead in water scandal, I like to thank members for having done their best to actually get the benefits for the plumbing works. I'd like to extend my respect to the member concerned. But the Chapter 102 is too soft. It only covers licensed plumbers. That's not right, because it's not good for the operation of the trade. Right now, well, we allow actually semi-skilled plumbers to do the work. Even apprentices can do the work. And even temporary workers who are not qualified, who are really not qualified, should not be allowed to do the work. Often in the society we've heard advertisements for professionally trained people doing designated work. That means the people should have taken lessons before doing the work. So how come people who are not qualified are allowed to do construction or installation work? Cleaning a street is different, but doing installation, removal, construction, and so forth, that sort of work, how can we hold these unqualified people accountable in the future? And I believe semi-skilled workers should also be held responsible, because we need to say for new buildings, like stories 1 to 5 could get the work done by semi-skilled workers. 6 or 5 years or 10 years later, if there are lead discovered in the water, there are so many connecting points, 10,000 connecting points in the building. So the semi-skilled workers may not actually have done the work properly, but if the water is found later on, years later, in lead found in the water, then we need to get someone responsible. For example, those who did the work from stories 1 to 5, and then the others who did the plumbing for floors 6 to 10 and so forth. So at least we need to know who did what and who's responsible for which floors, so that the plumber concerned could be prosecuted or held accountable later on. So I hope that the administration can take note of that, be fair and just in dealing with problems with plumbing works. For the lead in water scandal, I think given what happened, we should not be too lenient, to the extent that, as the administration said, that we can have temporary workers. But I don't think we can have temporary workers. That's really inconceivable to me. You can hire semi-skilled workers. There used to be various tiers of license, right? So you can have tier 2, tier 3 license, at least, which requires people to take some lessons. In 2014, I organized a course at Ivy. I let the students enrolled in the 3-year course. Students there enrolled have to study health, law, facilities. They need to spend at least 1.5 years on that, and then they need to carry out 31 hours of lessons, practical training, to be a qualified plumber. So if you're a licensed person, then you are the person to be held accountable. But the ordinance is talking about not just installation, but the law itself covers, or shows that there are problems with plumbers' lack of knowledge. So it's not just about doing technical work alone. So we need to have designated staff doing designated works. Please take a more serious attitude to the whole matter. And please, sorry, your time's up. Next one is Mr. Chen Yuen from the Hong Kong Electrical Mechanical Contractors Association. On June 1st, we have submitted a letter to you. In our submission, we refer to the Section 14.4b of the Amendment Bill. In Section 14.4b, it states that a person who carries out the construction or installation under the supervision of another person would commit an offense if Section 3 is contravened. On this point, our association and members have had thorough discussion, and we consult our members' views as well. And we also made reference to legislations on the electrical and mechanical industry, the installation of electrical appliances, lifts, escalators, maintenance and repair legislations, fire services regulations, and so forth, or ventilation system laws. We found that the legislations concerned would place the legal responsibility on the person who is responsible for the supervision. As for the installation part, if the person concerned is not responsible for supervision, then the worker concerned will only be held accountable for their crafts or technical skills, but not liable for any offense. If anyone, without any instruction from the supervisor or supervision, and construct or install waterworks, then the way that it's written now in Section 14.4b, I think to us the wording will create nuisance, because there's a chance that even at my home or in your home, well, we can tamper with pipes, water pipes, right? We may change some switches or do light waterworks, right? Or plumbing works. So if our skill is not good, of course, enough, resulting in water leakage in the end, in violation of the Waterworks ordinance, then on the whole, this person himself could be held liable under Section 14.4b and could be sued. If that's the case, then how can we attract new blood into the trade? Because if anyone, once he's made a mistake, could be held legally liable, then compared to other trades, in trades that have to do with water, like fire services, air conditioning, or water, other waterworks, even gardening or even watering plants could have legal consequences, or keeping swimming pools could be problematic. So I'd like the administration to amend Section 14.4b. As for the amendment proposed, we have already included it in our submission to you. Compared to other trades, we feel that the current amendment bill, the current ordinance has been untouched for 40 years. So on the whole, it's really time for us to, of course, make amendments. And our federation would support, on the whole, amending the ordinance. But we have reservations about Section 14.4b. Thank you. Next one is Mr. Lee Cheung Chi from Liberal Party. Thank you, Chairman. In 2017, this amendment bill, the purpose is very simple. It's to plug any loopholes to avoid a repeat of the lead and water scandal, because we are talking about public health here. But at the same time, the trade has a lot of concerns. This amendment bill itself fails to clarify or ease the concerns in the trade, particularly for the defense provisions. Do have much doubts. The defense provisions, does it amount to rule of law or rule by the people? And whether the explanations given would be appropriate. So the administration need to give the trade guidelines in relation to that. And there are also concerns that should an incident occur, all the skilled and semi-skilled workers and non-skilled workers could be held legally liable. I think that's really unreasonable because they're not professionals. Their daily work only actually relies on plans and specs, and also materials provided by the owner, flat owner, to do their work. But if you are to hold them accountable, well, they wouldn't be able to have laboratory tests of the materials given to them. So it would be unfair to hold them accountable. So you must clarify what you mean by the defense provisions. And once this amendment bill is approved, say if I just inadvertently make a mistake or if I'm wrongly accused by somebody else, then I could be legally liable. And that would deal a strong blow to the trade. And there's also the fact that if there are such risks involved, and young people would not want to enter the profession now that we are already short of staff. So with this stringent law, we will be even find it harder to recruit new laborer. For large works, they cover electrical, mechanical works, fire services, waterworks, and so forth. So a large number of workers are involved, say from floor 1 to 5. It could be one contractor doing the work, and then the floors above could be carried out by another contractor. So you can't possibly have detailed records of all the plumbing or water works done for the entire building. If licensed plumbers are to shoulder all the responsibilities, is that feasible? I do have doubts. There are outsourcing of work, in the trade. There are subcontractors, that. So the subcontractors and the contractors concerned, all of them cannot fully know or control what the procedures are and also what are the materials used. So you need to carefully calculate or work out the roles played by each party, particularly the main contractor and the secondary contractor. Can they come up with any defense? What sort of defense can they use? Because they may have used all kinds of excuses. They may say they don't know what are the materials used. If they just claim ignorance of all the materials used, then would that constitute a defense provision or defense? So there are really lots of areas that the administration need to clarify. And the latest amendment added by the administration, that is about the 6-month period proposed. I think that would mean that there's no deadline in lodging a prosecution. So that would put a lot of pressure for the traders, because the workers would not know or whether they would be held liable after all in the end.
So I hope the administration can strike a balance. Our proposal is to change the time limit to 6 years after discovery of offense. Now, about the trade's views, I think the administration should consider very carefully these suggestions. Next, Mr. Cheung Wai Cheung, Chairman of the Hong Kong Waterworks Professional Association Limited. Thank you, Chairman. We believe that the bill is not fair to licensed plumbers because the LP is responsible for a lot of things. For registered workers or skilled workers, semi-skilled workers, etc., is not controlled by the Water Supplies Department but by another authority. But ultimately, the responsibility falls on the shoulders of licensed plumbers. The current Waterworks Ordinance has imposed stringent control on us. We have no alternative but to bear this burden. And that's what I wish to say. Next, Ms. Lee Mew Lei, frontline the technician. I'm Lee Mew Lei. I want to point out that I really hate this administration for putting forward minor amendments and improvements to deceive the people of Hong Kong. It's been more than 2 years since the lead in water incident occurred, and according to the COI report, we need to legislate on safe drinking water, and the Water Supplies Department should also supervise the safety of water based on the relevant standards. I oppose the bill because that we have Dr. Farwell, the expert in the inquiry, saying that the materials will directly affect the safety of drinking water, but it seems that his advice has not been heeded. We seem to be putting the blame on licensed plumbers causing the lead in water incident to occur, but this is not true. If the use of materials is supervised properly, then regardless of who installs the parts, there should not be a problem. I think it is the main contractor's responsibility to supervise the use of materials, and they should also send somebody to the manufacturer to oversee the production process. And the department should educate the public on safe materials, and that is to say no toxic substance or heavy metal would be discharged or released into water to affect its safety. For plumbers, well, they should not decide simply by visual inspection whether the materials are safe. There should be some lab tests to ensure that the materials are safe. After testing, the main contractor or the developer should be responsible for assigning inspectors to oversee the manufacturing process of materials, and they should conduct further verification tests to ensure that no toxic materials should be released into the water. And the Hong Kong government always talks about enhancing Hong Kong's competitive edge, but the drinking water problem will have profound implications on public health. And it also affects our healthcare system. It will become a burden. Well, and also in approving the applications, the Water Supplies Department should also ensure that the materials used are safe. The WSD, in setting testing parameters, has not considered local circumstances. They just draw reference from the WHO standard. Well, in the WHO standards were drawn up in the 80s by the European Union, and they are outdated. And there is still this mindset that as long as we supervise licensed plumbers and the installation of waterworks, it will be all right. But this doesn't work. I don't understand why the government is still dragging on its feet as far as safe water drinking legislation is concerned. Safe drinking water legislation is very different from the Waterworks Amendment Bill, because if we have safe drinking water legislation, the government will need to invest in R&D instead of squandering public money on white elephant projects. The government will need to ensure safe source of water supply, and there will also be research and development on materials, because we're constantly using new materials, and if we invest in R&D, we can come up with newer, safer materials. For example, for one material, it's already been proven by R&D by research that the lead content released into the water is so minimal that humans will not be affected. And if we have safe drinking water legislation, well, your time is up. Next, Dr. Cheng Huang, Hong Kong Institution of Plumbing and Drainage Limited.
Chairman, the Hong Kong IPDL is very concerned that heavy burden will be imposed on licensed plumbers through the enactment of the Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017 in general. The HKIPDL is supportive of the new enactment. The importance of the common law and the rule of equity are all enshrined in Article 8 of the Basic Law, in which the presumption of innocence and that the burden of proof lies with the prosecution are key components. But now the bill has the burden of proof reversed to the shoulders of the accused licensed plumbers. The incident of excessive lead in drinking waters was very unfortunate, and it was committed only by a small minority of the licensed plumbers. But if the majority of the licensed plumbers were to bear the brunt of this malpractice, then the government is really finding the wrong culprit. The HKIPDL is one of the providers for the Waterworks Department's, Water Supplies Department's voluntary continuing professional scheme for licensed plumbers. Over the last 4 months, the HKIPDL has organized over 5 numbers of CBD events for the licensed plumbers, and the response has been overwhelming. Each seminar has had at least 100 licensed plumbers enrolled to attend these seminars or activities. This demonstrated that the eagerness and the cooperativeness of the licensed plumbers who are willing to improve themselves on a voluntary basis. At all times, the government should treat licensed plumbers as friends rather than foes. The HKIPDL has the following stance. Number one, when excessive lead was found in drinking water, there must be more than one factor involved rather than to blame the licensed plumbers alone. Number two, other possible contributors to the excessive lead, including manufacturers and suppliers, should also be counted in the investigation. Number three, since this is a reverse burden of proof, the HKIPDL stresses that before a licensed plumber is to be prosecuted, intentions to commit the offense must be established. In a wider sense, the HKIPDL is supportive of this enactment. On page C829 of the law, of the bill, we suggest to show mercy to the licensed plumber by deleting the words in red and to add those filled in. Subsection 3 remains the same, so I don't intend to read it. But subsection 5 will be modified to read like this. It is a defense for a person charged with an offense under subsection 3 if the person establishes that at the time of alleged offense, the person had a reasonable ground to believe and did believe that there is no requirement to comply with. Number 4, since this is a reverse burden of proof, the HKIPDL stresses that the laws must try to find the positive motive, but not to find the negative intentions. On page C831, we suggest to delete the words in red and to add those filled in. We hope to present the positive picture rather than a negative one. And subsection 3(5) will be read like this. It is a defense for a person charged with an offense under subsection 4 if the person establishes that at the time of the alleged offense, the person had reasonable grounds to believe and did believe that the statement or information concerned was true. Number 5, the HK IPDL stresses that there are more contributors than just the licensed plumbers. Inspection must also include the potential risk caused by the manufacturers and suppliers. On page C821, the HK IPDL proposes to add one more category of matters so as to alert all the parties involved. And subsection 7 will include the potential tampering by other
time's
parties.
Up, Dr. Wong.
Thank you, Chairman.
好，下一位係
It's Dr. Chiang. Next, Dr. Wong, the Chartered Institute of Plumbing and Heating Hong Kong branch. Thank you, Chairman. Well, as you know, after the lead in water incident, a lot of follow-up work has to be done. And our institute is involved in a lot of works of the Water Supplies Department, and we therefore support the bill. The bill seeks to improve the current ordinance on installation and other supervisory requirements. For example, the testing of materials. Well, this is an ongoing exercise, and we do have a view on this matter. Our institute would like to draw your attention to section 14(4)(c). In relation to the licensed plumber, if something goes wrong, the licensed plumber would be involved under this subsection. For 14(5)(a), there is a defense, and that is to say, if the licensed plumber can establish that reasonable steps have been taken. That's in 14(5)(a). But what is meant by reasonable steps? I don't think it's clearly specified. I think they have yet to be finalized. Still, I think that a defense available to the licensed plumber will give the licensed plumber a chance to explain. Perhaps there might be something wrong in the process, in the alteration works, such that the person may be held accountable, and then there is this defense.
點解會有咁嘅情況呢？咁有冇會考慮到？
Well, but there's another point. Let's say if the licensed plumber can establish that, but what about the victim? The owner is the victim, and the owner may decide to renovate the flat, but he may not know about the requirements under the Waterworks ordinance. Well, let's say if, apart from the owner, there are those who are affected by the owner, say the tenant's health is affected, then I think the department should think more thoroughly on this matter.
That's all I want to say.
吳思樂小姐。
Next one, is Ms. Ng from Progressive Lawyers. Thank you, Chairman. In reviewing the amendment, Progressive Lawyers looked at the concern for water safety. Despite the amendments, Progressive Lawyers remain very disappointed because water safety in Hong Kong is still a cause of deep concern, and we are worried. Section 15, the amendment stops non-designated persons from carrying out designated plumbing works. In other words, only specified people can carry out plumbing works. In moving the amendment, the government made reference to the current operational mode in the trade. And you want to give the current mode legal basis, legal status, and approval rather than addressing the issue of water safety. This is actually like putting the cart before the horse. And in other words, in your amendment, any people under the supervision of plumbing or licensed plumbers can carry out plumbing works. That is, the person concerned will not need to receive any training, apply for any license before they carry out plumbing works. So if that's the case, how can we ensure the quality of plumbing works, and also how can we ensure water safety? And even though we can see that the plumbing works only involve installation, construction, removal of works, but Section 14.3 only covers certain areas. So professional lawyers urge the administration to include other types of plumbing works in 14(3), so that all types of plumbing works would make sure that the quality and size of materials used for plumbing works would conform with prescribed standards. Because when it comes to alteration, maintenance, repair of plumbing works, we need to make sure that adequate materials or standard materials are used to ensure water safety. And also, progressive lawyers feel that the newly added offenses cannot really regulate contractors. The penalty of 15,000 in current ordinance as the maximum penalty is very small amount considering the huge costs of plumbing projects. I think that the maximum penalty should be jail sentence, so that people who could break the law would be deterred. And also 14(2) and 15(2) for minor alterations or repair works offer exemptions. But in the ordinance, there's no definition for works of like nature. So therefore, the wording concern, you really need to provide a clear definition so that for different types of works, there wouldn't be different definitions used to let people who have actually contravened the legislation get away with it. And we need to ensure there's no abuse of power, and also that water safety is ensured. Progressive lawyers also have concern about Section 15(1), which states that non-specified persons cannot carry out plumbing works. And also, for minor alterations, repair works could be exempted. But in 15(4), it says that anyone carrying out water repair works, the liability is there, but it makes no mention of 15(2). That is, anyone who's hired to carry out minor repair works could breach the law. I think the government should really make further clarifications. Based on the above points, progressive lawyers think that the water amendment bill is the amendment concerned only done in a haste without due considerations for all matters, and it has failed to address the public concern about water safety. We hope that the government can come up with more amendments as soon as possible, or to come up with water safety legislation. Next one, please. I'm from the Licensed Plumbers Union. I'm Cheung Chi. I do think that there's a need for amendment because of what happened, the Latin water incident, and it will help with our trade, we believe, with the amendments. Our union met with the Water Supply Department on May 19, and we have submitted a paper to the administration, and I think members have got a copy for your reference. Let me ask the administration again to that is implied for all sorts of approvals. I hope that you can really expedite the procedures and the work concerned, and also tighten your monitoring. And we are opposed to any criminal liabilities imposed on us or the trade as a whole. And as for the verification of license of plumbers, who are qualified, how can we make sure that those plumbers can get back the licenses? And we don't know what we can do. Please, the Water Supply Department, I hope that they can give us a clearer answer on how we can, these plumbers can get back the licenses. And we also hope that you can expedite your process of giving approval. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have heard from all the deputations. Now I will ask the administration, having heard from all the deputations, please respond. Mr. Mack, please. Deputy Secretary. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, deputations, for your views. Let me try to respond to all. First of all, the latest amendment, Waterworks Amendment Bill 2017, actually is part of our holistic review of the Waterworks Ordinance. As I mentioned at the first meeting of the Bills Committee, we have different stages of work, and we can see that there are two urgent issues that need to be addressed first. The first is the latest amendment, the purpose of which is that is under Section 15 of the current ordinance, where it stated that anyone who requires plumbing, who carries out plumbing works, has to be a licensed plumber. So this wording itself, compared to what's happening in the trade, it is something new. It's not the objective of the current law. So what we need to do is to change the current provision to make it fit with the current practice in the trade, and also the policy goal. And also, most importantly, we want to dovetail with the legislation requiring designated people doing designated works, because that particular legislation spells out who can carry out plumbing works. So you can see that the latest amendments actually are intended to tie in with the legislation itself. And the second kind of work that we need to do is, as I just mentioned, we need to, in relation to the current criteria under the Waterworks Ordinance, we need to upgrade the criteria required, so that for materials now permitted by Water Supplies Department, which are now available, information of which are available online to be incorporated into the legislation so that the trade knows what they need to follow in accordance with the law. These are two pressing areas, so we are trying to tackle them in the first stage. And there are also a series of work that we are doing. Just then, deputations mentioned, and they asked why we're just coming up with minor amendments. Why don't we have a one-off overhaul? But I hope that you can understand our roadmap. That is that it's not that our work is finished with the latest amendments. Indeed, afterwards we will still have other stages of work to be finished. And secondly, I heard from many deputations that concerning the latest amendments and the criminal liabilities for plumbing workers, they're worried. As many have stated, and let me clarify. Right now, under the current Waterworks ordinance, anyone who have used substandard materials for plumbing works, and that person is already criminally liable, and that's already covered in the current legislation. The latest amendments are not to increase their liabilities, but it's just that we would give them statutory defense so that they have a chance to come up with their own defense. So that's the entire concept. We're not trying to, through the latest amendments, increase anyone's criminal liabilities. I've also heard from deputations questions about why shouldn't we increase their liabilities? Why shouldn't we increase the penalty? Actually, in our next stage of work, we will consider that. That's part of our work to be completed over time. We're not just monitoring licensed plumbers, but also we will look at the role of contractors and other related parties, the roles that they play, what roles should they play, and where they should be held liable legally. That is also part of our review. At our next stage of work, we will propose new measures for discussion. And right now, the latest amendments will not cover those areas. So I think that's about it for my response. So I'll see if anyone has other questions. Okay, so maybe it's now time for members to ask questions. Or you may raise questions to the deputations. Each will have 5 minutes. Please raise your hands. First is Helena Wong, 5 minutes. Just then, first of all, I'd like to thank all the deputations, stakeholders for coming and letting us know your areas of concern. I think we are doing all this because of the Latin Water incident 2 years ago, and we found that some workers use soldering materials contaminated with lead in their works in public housing estates, and we found that tens of thousands of families are being affected, and 11 children are still diagnosed with slow brain development because of the consumption of lead water. So they may have lifelong health or developmental issues because of the lead in water. You're saying that we should not deal a blow to the trade, but let's remember, what impact would the incident have on public health?
So in relation to the views of the trade, regardless of workers, material supplier, contractors, and the government, we think that they all have a role to play to ensure we have safe drinking water. Just now I heard Ms. Liu Lei and Ms. Ng they also expressed concern on safe water legislation. We need a comprehensive set of laws, but now the government is trying to plug the loopholes of an ordinance that is outdated by 40 years. We don't think this can safeguard the safety of drinking water. We're not happy with just minor amendments, but just now the administration explained that this is just a first step, and the government will continue to proceed with safe drinking water legislation. And just now some deputations said that there should not be any criminal liability, and there should not be criminal liability on the part of supervisors. I'm not going to accept it, because if no criminal liability is involved, then there is no control in the trade. As a supervisor, you should have the knowledge, you should have undergone training, and you should understand the law and the materials. And we have semi-skilled workers and professional registered workers under the supervision of a supervisor. And just now, some deputation said that he is concerned about the use of professional registered workers who have yet to undergo training, and this may open the back door for introducing untrained workers. We should consider whether to allow professional workers to work on the site. Mr. Vincent Mack. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your question. First point, on workers working on site who have yet to receive training. Our current requirement is that for untrained workers, they can only carry out works under supervision. That is in relation to Waterworks. This is also the practice of the trade. As I explained just now, on the 1st of April, after we introduced the requirement of designated workers for designated trade, we already imposed certain requirements. One consideration is for succession of the trade, because the trade's established practice is to have master and apprentices. So although we do provide relevant training, very often in reality, workers would acquire skills and knowledge on the job with their masters. And there are different areas of waterworks. Some may be more labor intensive, like carrying pipes. Well, Mr. Mac, but you just call them transportation workers. If you're talking about carrying pipes, you won't call them professional workers. Well, I'll come to that in a minute, but I'm talking about general workers. They would be allowed to carry out works under supervision, as I mentioned. The other category of workers is professional workers. That is registered semi-skilled or skilled workers, but professional. It is an arrangement under the designated workers for designated trade requirement, which provides for which provides the criteria for workers to be registered as skilled or semi-skilled workers. But before the registration takes effect, the worker concerned may not yet possess the certain knowledge required, and that is why we have set up this provisional category. And this category will lapse once the transition period is over. This is just a transitional arrangement for some workers to meet the minimum requirement to become professional workers, and we are not expanding this category. It's very different from the so-called temporary or casual workers. it is stipulated and defined in the law, and this is under the designated workers for designated trade. As for the temporary workers, not the professional workers mentioned in the temporary workers or designated workers or designated trade, these workers will need to work under supervision, similar to apprentices. Well, Chairman, today, unfortunately, we have practitioners in the trade, and we are members of this council. We may not be familiar with what happens on the site. So I'd like to know what level of workers are involved. I want to know whether you accept the administration's explanation and whether this bill can improve the safety of drinking water and whether we can truly regulate workers working on site. Mr. Chiang and Ms. also touched on this issue. I think a number of deputations have also touched on this issue. And who would like to take this question? Mr. Chiang? Thank you, Dr. Wong. Thank you, Chairman. Well, you mentioned temporary workers. We believe that there should be professional apprentices for them to have hands-on experience on the site. We already set it out in our submission that there should be apprentices for skilled worker, semi-skilled worker, so on and so forth, because they must have undergone certain training and they should know what leaded materials are about, because otherwise it's very dangerous. I think that you have given your answer, and that is you support something like a professional apprentice. But I haven't yet responded to the other point. For other trades, for skilled or semi-skilled worker, they can supervise a non-skilled worker, but well, they may be about installing doors or bar fixing, and these are easier, whereas for drinking water, it's a major issue. Like Dr. Wong said, 11 housing estates were involved in the incident. Well, your views are heard, Mr. Zhang. Mr. Chen Li-sing? In relation to workers in the construction industry, perhaps I can give members some information. Because the CIC implements, has this construction industry registration authority, which is responsible for implementing the designated workers or designated trade arrangement, and it is an across-the-board approach, having all workers to be registered in one go. And as a result, the authority may not be able to process all registration at the same time. That is why the administration has created this new category of provisional workers. For these workers, they actually have ample work experience. For general worker, regardless of the trade at the construction site, if you're not a skilled or semi-skilled worker, then you fall into the category of general workers. And regardless of the trade, we usually have people who are not really in the trade helping out. I may need to ask workers to move materials for me. The materials may not be about Waterworks, but about, say, air conditioning or E&M. We have so many such workers on site, but they do not fall under a certain category as the master. And before they get a semi-skilled registration, they still need to hold a license or a permit as a general worker, and as they enter the site on the strength of this license, they can only help out, so to speak. At first, they may help in moving parts and materials, and then the general worker will continue to, say, learn from the master and have on-the-job experience to acquire knowledge. We may not have a very good system to groom each worker. If they're interested, they can learn under the system. If they're not, they then will not become an apprentice of any trade, and they can only learn whilst on the job. Because if we do not adopt this approach, the trade will not survive. Next, Mr. Wong. I think it is necessary to have the professional worker arrangement, because for contractors, we really need workers to do the manual work, and if we ask the skilled or semi-skilled worker to do the heavy lifting, it will definitely increase our costs. But I understand the lead in water incident is quite sensitive. I suggest that the department operates more courses for these workers so that they understand what is meant by the lead in water incident and what is meant by qualified equipment. See? Well, I think it's very strange for us to argue about professional workers or skilled workers. I don't think lead in water can be resolved by just addressing this issue. We need to consider the materials. Ms. Lee Muley, I understand that the worker. Well, Ms. Lee, I note your view. I'm sorry. Please stop speaking. I think your views are very clear. You have already made your point, and that safe drinking water cannot. We cannot. In order to have safe drinking water, we cannot only depend on licensed plumber. But this bill is about licensed plumber. But Chairman, I think that we should respect individuals who have come to express their views, having taken leave from office. Well, I just want to remind deputations to focus on this bill. We note your view, and we also agree that this bill is not the total solution to ensuring safe drinking water. On the arrangement of workers, do you have other views? It is impossible to know whether the materials are safe or not. I hope that you'll bear this in mind, because this is very important. I object to the idea that the workers should bear all criminal liability. I don't think we should blame workers for the safety of materials. Mr. Wong? I'd like to comment on the workers' registration system as well. It is very difficult to get the qualification of skilled worker. At present, the passing rate is the lowest among all categories. I don't think that anyone else is qualified to carry out waterworks. This is the established practice. At present, they are in charge of many waterworks projects. I think that they can supervise the works. Of course, the works should be confined to a certain area. We're talking about works undertaken by workers, but in a construction project, we are not only relying on workers. For licensed plumbers, they also play a major role. Just now, we talked about giving instructions to workers. Does it mean that they only carry the materials up to the site to work? Of course not, because for the whole construction project, there is some project management. We have engineers, we have supervisors, etc. We have a whole system. So I don't think we should focus on just the work of workers.
I think we should let the workers know what their obligations are and responsibilities are, and they can do what they can do. I think technically speaking, they can do the work, but not, however, in terms of the law or rationale. If you ask workers to acquire much knowledge, that they may not want to, and neither can they, because for these workers, well, they do not expect, or they have never been trained in other kinds of knowledge. So I think we need to do what is doable. As for control of materials, among engineers, I think there is division of work already. The plumbers, as for asking them to see whether there are problems with the plan or whether the materials used are contaminated, then of course licensed plumbers should take note of that. But for the workers themselves, ordinary workers, they will just work according to the instruction of the plumbers. Sorry, Mr. Wong, please cut short what you have to say. You've said what you wanted to say anyway. So, Ms. Ng, you want to comment, right? Yes. Allowing someone who has not taken any course to carry out plumbing works, that's exactly an example of putting the cart before the horse. From the perspective of safe drinking water, even if a worker on the surface knows how to do the work, if you can't understand the importance of different types of materials, the risks concerned, then that actually will jeopardize the health of Hong Kong people and also water safety here. Next one, Dr. Wong. On the professional staff, I think there are professional staff in any trade, but doesn't mean that professional staff can be anyone without any knowledge. I mean, the people concerned should have basic knowledge of their work, and that's really not enough. You need to monitor their work as well, and also delineate the boundaries of the work, what they can do and what they shouldn't touch. It's not like you just leave them alone, working on their own for 1 month. That's something that we need to actually increase monitoring of. Mr. David Lau, next. I do support having professional staff because in plumbing works, besides working with the pipes, there are also pots and other areas of work that a worker needs to do. And not all workers actually would do the actual plumbing or the connecting of pipes. So you need to have all kinds of semi-skilled staffs under the supervision of licensed plumbers. Instruction, meaning not passing on legal knowledge, is more about passing on technical skills. Well, this is, of course, time for members to discussion, and it's not just for Helena Wong to air her views. So I'd like to ask the DS to comment so far, what you've heard. It's like the wordings could be confusing to some, because just then, DS, what you meant by professional staff are like special arrangements. People who are experienced but have not yet got a license, in alignment with the policy to have dedicated staff doing that designated work. And so people who are unfamiliar with the trade may consider professional as just anyone who can be recruited to get on board a project. Even our members could be confused. And also, and there's the general concept of professional staff, like people who are neither plumbers nor semi-skilled workers, and neither are they covered by the professional staff mentioned in the ordinance. They're just non-technical staff. So under what circumstance can these people do the plumbing works under supervision, and what would be their liabilities? I think that's what we are concerned about. So DS, could you elaborate further? Yes, Chairman, you made it very clear indeed. Okay, what's the main difference? As for professional staff, in the ordinance, they actually refer to what I was explaining. That is under the legislation on designated staff. We need to really clarify it. That is, and you need to let people know why there should be transitional arrangements in the plumbing works projects. Every year, the number of these people actually have decreased number after they've obtained the qualifications and knowledge. In the past few years, the professional grade actually is shrinking in size. From what I know, for plumbing works, the professional staff concerned, there's the people who have not yet got the license. There are only about 70 of them. So for the entire trade with 10,000 workers, they make up a very small number indeed. And what you were also referring to, please don't call them professional staff, but what you were referring to, they are non-technical staff or workers. As I just explained, these non-technical workers within the trade, there's a need for them because often you cannot, every time find a plumber to do the basic work. You need to attract new blood after all. Therefore, we have this model of instruction and supervision so that these people can keep picking up knowledge about the trade along the way. And just one more point here. Just then there's a point made about the standards for materials. For plumbers, they only need to follow the legal requirements. So in setting the standards, we are the authority who would set the standards. In another subcommittee, there's a proposal to upgrade the standards in the Waterworks ordinance. We're doing that. And for the technical workers and plumbers, they only need to follow the standards prescribed or requirements prescribed in the ordinance. That's fine. That'll be fine. Okay, and then while you have to wait for the next round because other members have got questions. Next one, Chiang. Chairman, thank you, the deputations, for coming. Of course, this ordinance has been around for decades, and problems are bound to occur now if you want to amend it. And we were discussing who would be considered as qualified to enter the work site. And that is newly added to the ordinance. And therefore, there are disputes. But based on, what you just heard from the deputations, there are views opposing and for the addition. So we really don't know what's the best way for it, but I would support, with appropriate supervision, there should be people helping with the work, entering the work site. But as for the application for commencement of waterworks, just then I heard that it will take 4 months for the waterworks project to be able to commence. Actually, in the new territories, I found that there are some villages which require piping system, and the water supplies department asked the villages to overhaul the entire water supply system, and they have submitted an application to connect the pipes for inside surface. But they're worried that it will take a long time for them to get the new water supply or plumbing works for inside service begin. So is it really necessary for it to take 4 months to get the work started? Well, the entire workflow involves various procedures covering all the way from the design, choice of materials, and so forth. Therefore, it all depends on whether you have submitted to us all the information we need when you apply. But basically, the Water Supplies Department, through various channels, have been aware of your concern. So we will try to optimize the workflow. And we're trying to really enhance the process, and we never intended, however, to incorporate the workflow into the ordinance. But we have been discussing and communicating with the trade to see how we can streamline the administrative procedures so that on the one hand, the waterworks or the approval procedure will not be compromised, but on the other hand, the trade can get the approval earlier. So we are working in that direction. But Chairman, I'm worried, however, that I know another subcommittee is talking about reform in the waterworks, but your mode of operation now in terms of giving approval, say in scenarios where the parts are outdated, because of the Latin water incident, and if the parts need to be changed, then maybe different villages would need to have the parts changed too. So no wonder you say that the profession is having a manpower shortage. Why don't you in the ordinance require for a quicker supply of parts, and instead of just making the plumbers, contractors comply with the legal requirement? Have you got a timetable for yourself? Well, just then, Mr. Wong mentioned that for the approval time of 4 months for newly built structures that can be arranged, but for buildings in need of repair, or even for minor waterworks, they will need to comply with the law, and the entire process is time-consuming. I understand very few ordinances include timetable or workflow in it, but you need to think about how you can cope with the issue of time. Okay, DS, please. Yes, even the current legislation hasn't stipulated the time frame, but we do internally have a standard of 30 days. That's our internal standard. But Mr. Leung proposes that maybe we can consider regulating on the time or the period of time needed. But that is not part of our current exercise. But maybe at our next stage of work, we'll consider what we can do in relation to the time frame. Next one is Pun Xiu Ping and then Xiu Ka Fai. Pun Xiu Ping? Thank you, deputations, for coming. On the ordinance itself, I know that you're worried about the workers' liabilities or even the impact on getting new blood. And just then the administration said that under the current ordinance, the plumbers are regulated by law, and there will also be defense provision for the workers in the amendments, and that would help workers know clearly what their liabilities could be. But this morning's deputation asked about the definition of minor works.
I don't know whether in this bill the administration will explain more clearly of a minor nature, because it also relates to the defense. And about prosecution, some deputations commented that it seems that there is no time bar to prosecution 6 months after discovery of offense. I'd like to see the administration's response to deputations' views about provisional workers, semi and skilled workers. My question is whether the administration has considered the impact on the trade if this takes effect, because this is the concern of deputations. Thank you, Mr. Poon, for the questions. On criminal liability, especially criminal liability to be incurred by workers taking part in the works, this is their concern. Like Ms. Lee just now said, even workers may not know what materials are being used. We'd like to listen to the administration's explanation first. Let me respond to the several questions. First, on the definition of minor. We have a definition for that. It is on our website. Basically, the industry should know what this arrangement means. I think this has been put in place for quite some time. It's an established arrangement and proved to be effective. That is why we have not included the definition of minor in this bill. I'd like to also respond to the point about criminal liability. What should be regarded as having breached the law? The worker may be ignorant about the law. Our understanding is that different people may have different level of knowledge. For a general worker, the requirements imposed on him is different from that imposed on a licensed plumber. The concept is that if a worker only works in accordance with an instruction, and then if something goes wrong, as long as the worker has complied with the instructions, then this worker has a defense. But of course, let's say if it's a frolic of his own, if the worker is asked to buy non-leaded material, but at the time of procurement, the worker hasn't specified that unleaded materials be bought, then he may be liable. So it depends on the actual circumstances whether the worker's act constitutes a reasonable excuse. But the general concept is that under the existing ordinance, we'd like to provide a reasonable or defense by way of reasonable excuse to the worker. And about the prosecution time limit of 6 months, at the moment, the requirement is that prosecution should be instigated 6 months after the incident occurred, but basically this is impossible because once we come into knowledge of this non-compliance, it usually will be 6 months from the date of occurrence, and that is why we propose to set the time limit at 6 months from the discovery of offense. If after discovery of offense we cannot instigate prosecution within 6 months, then we will be out of time. And this is adopted by a number of legislation such as the lift and escalator safety ordinance and the gas safety ordinance. And we believe that in order to have deterrence, so as to make sure that the works team will comply with the law, we need to amend the provision to the time limit of 6 months from the discovery of offence. Next, Mr. Peter Shiu, followed by Dr. Edward Yu. Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the 6-month prosecution time bar. The existing provision stipulates that prosecution should be instigated 6 months after the occurrence of the incident. But now you're proposing to amend the law such that prosecution can be instigated 6 months after the discovery of offence. In other words, for workers and those related, they will carry this liability forever until the day they die. I want to know whether this is fair. I don't know about the other ordinances you cited, why members supported the passage of those bills. But first of all, did you supervise, or are you going to supervise their works? Or are you just putting the blame on them? Let's say if you cannot finish the inspections in 6 months, then I understand it, but at least there should be a time limit, because a lot of personnel is involved. There may be the licensed plumber, subcontractors, subcontractors, skilled workers, or even odd job workers. Well, basically the odd job workers now has a defense, but I think that it's there may be a lot of disputes whether he has acted in accordance with instructions, and then maybe decades later they can still argue about whether the instruction is given correctly or not. For main contractor or subcontractors, there may be very clear work procedures written down, but when it comes to the licensed plumber and also the skilled worker, well, I don't know whether works procedures can also be written out, but for really general low-skilled worker, it's difficult to write down the instruction. The instruction will be given verbally. When a case is taken to court, then there will be a lot of disputes. Mr. Mack. Let me try to respond to that. Basically, the WSD carries out inspection and check for compliance. When the works are completed, a report will have to be made to the WSD, and there will be a compliance check before the certificate is issued. And in that process, checks will be done to see if the compliance are to see if the materials are in compliance. But apart from that, even for this process, random inspection will be conducted even before works are completed. And during the inspection, most importantly, if wrong materials are used such that prosecution is necessary, then 6 months after, within 6 months of the date of inspection, evidence will have to be gathered, prosecution will have to be instigated. And I understand Mr. Peter Shiu's point. Let's say several years later, the offence is discovered, whether the person should still be held liable. Well, currently, it is provided that, let's say, at the time of compliance check, the incident is not discovered. It is only discovered subsequently. Then at present, we do require the licensed plumber to be criminally liable, because when it comes to the responsibility of different levels of personnel, our proposal is for the licensed plumber to be responsible in terms of the use of materials. But of course, he is also given a statutory defense, and that is if he has taken all reasonable steps to ensure that the materials are in compliance, then he can use this defense. As to what he has to do to make sure this is done, well, it depends on the evidence gathering stage. But let's say if a non-compliance is identified, then the first person to be held responsible should be the licensed plumber. As to whether the skilled or non-skilled worker should be held responsible as well, then that depends on the evidence gathered. But that's our current intention. Mr. Shiu, you'd like to follow up? May I also comment on this, Chairman? Well, that's why you heard how emotional Mr. Cheung was, because licensed plumbers would be responsible for everything. Even when the licensed plumber becomes old and frail decades later, he may still be liable. We have 2,000, 3,000 licensed plumbers in Hong Kong, but only 700 are active. How many licensed plumbers would actually be attached on site all the time, supervising the works? I don't think many of them. Usually, they would delegate the responsibility to somebody who is experienced to check the materials, etc. So, when there is a scandal, when there is a problem, the administration acts really hastily in putting forward this bill. Like Dr. Helena Wong said, you should consider safe drinking water legislation instead of this minor improvement. Mr. Shiu, your view is clear. I think that when it comes to examining the bill clause by clause, we'll focus on this as well to see whether the administration's proposal works. Well, Dr. Helena Wong spoke for some 20 minutes, but I only spoke for 7 minutes. Well, just now, Dr. Helena Wong did not speak throughout. We only allow time for deputations to give their views. But I can continue. Chairman, I haven't finished. So press the button and wait. Dr. Edward, you. 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. First question, we have Institute of Architects and Hong Kong Institute of Engineers. They have written in. They have not sent a representative to come. And they also suggest to add a category of registered waterworks engineer in the law. I'd like to hear from the administration their response. Second point, some deputations talked about minor waterworks in domestic premises, something that you can actually carry out by yourself. I'd like to know how this will be addressed. And HKIDPL, Dr. Chiang put forward some specific suggestions. He would like to change the statutory defense from a negative one to a positive one, and also section 14 subsection 4 about the 6 items. Somebody proposes to change it from 6 to 2. Only construction and installation. I'd like you to explain why you propose only to have construction or installation but not alteration, demolition, etc. First, on introducing a category of registered engineer, as explained last time, at the next phase, we are going to look into that, and we also consider whether it is necessary to introduce this category, what their responsibilities are, whether they should be held criminally liable. We are considering these issues and we're discussing with the industry. And yes, indeed, we are giving this a thought. On, say, water tap replacement in domestic premises, currently on the WSD's website, we regard it as minor works and as a result not subject to this legislation. The professional lawyers group just now commented that the ordinance would be amended in such a way that employers would be held liable for even very minor works in domestic premises. But this is not our intention. If necessary, we will further amend the provisions. Point number 4, on construction and installation. At present, our suggestion is that repair, etc., are not included. So unless we're talking about major renovation or repair works, we only regard other works as minor works and not subject to this ordinance.
So that's our thinking so far. For large-scale works, like for the entire building, that's different. How about you? So for 14(4), you will consider adding to it large-scale repair. Is that right? Is that what you meant? And also, you mentioned about household works. What are you going to change? For household works, I was saying that in relation to employer, the word employ, I just heard from the progressive lawyers that the way that is written now, 14(2), it offers an exemption. Minor works are exempted, but for employ it's not. But that's not our intent. So we'll see whether there's a need to change the wordings. 14(4), would you consider adding large-scale repair to it? Now, we're saying that we require 14(3), we require compliance, and that covers installation and construction. But what we mean by installation and construction, well, of course, for plumbing in large-scale estates, that's also covered. I think when it comes to clause-by-clause scrutiny, we'll see whether we need to make changes there. I think, how about defense provisions? Legal advisor, Ms. Chow. Sorry, Ms. Lau. As for the statutory defense proposals, it depends on the government's policy. If there are any changes in the policy, the law could be adjusted. But I think one area we need to consider is possibly on C829. Dr. Chen's submission mentioned it too, whether it really correlates with the relevant crime. And also, ultimately, it's up to whether it's in line with the government's policy. Okay, so DS. So basically, I think during the scrutiny stage, we can discuss that, look into that further. Okay. Helena Wong, second time. Chairman. On minor works, the definition of it, Mr. Mack just then said that on the Water Supplies Department is uploaded there, the definition of minor. But if you only put information on your website and not in the law, would those information have legal effect? Legal advisor, yes, it does have legal effect because Section 15(2), it authorizes the Water Authority to, on minor inside surface plumbing system, construction alteration, repair work which are minor, the Water Supplies Department has the right to decide. So is information online has legal effect, of course, but you can consider incorporate them into the law. or follow the current practice, leave it up to the water authority to decide. But if you leave it into the ordinance, then when you want to make changes later on, you will need to change the entire law. Okay, why shouldn't we put it into the law then, Mr. Mack? As I just said, as for what constitutes minor, it is actually an outcome of our years of discussion with the trade. So we've reached a consensus. We did spend quite a lengthy period of time to come up with the definition. But the government would not oppose incorporating it into the law, right? Well, it depends on the actual proposal and the actual writing. Adding to the law, well, we have an open attitude towards that. But ultimately, if we write it into the law, if what is written is different from what's currently known, then we need to have further negotiations or discussions with the trade. So, as the legal advisor just said, in the future, if you want to make further changes, then you will need to follow complex procedures. Not like now, say when the trade, well, they may have a view on what minor means, and which can spare them from the need to submitting plans and so forth. And once they've reached a consensus with the department, they can put the information online. But in the future, if you put the definition into the law, then you will need to go through quite extensive procedures. Okay, we will ask the legal advice later on whether we should put it into the law. Okay, another question here, a broader issue also raised by the deputations. Now, with the latest amendments, they focus on regulating workers. We all know the Latin water incident, the problem didn't arise from the workers alone. The government did have a role to play, and stakeholders include clients, developers, contractors, material suppliers, merchandisers, licensed plumbers, workers, and so forth. And yet the people in the front have not been touched. You're just focusing on the people at the bottom of the list. I know knowledge and monitoring of workers is important, but how come those who call the shots are not mentioned at all in the amendments? So, of all the other stakeholders I just mentioned, do they have any roles or responsibilities at all? Mr. Mack, as I just mentioned, this review of the Waterworks Ordinance comprises various stages, and the first stage of work seeks to plug the legal loopholes. At our next stage of work, we will look at the various stakeholders in the plumbing trade and what their roles are, what they should do, and also whether we need to regulate them. So if there's regulation, how we should go about doing that. So we are still continuing our work. As I said earlier on, we do hope that early next year, by then we will have proposals from consultation with the trade and see whether the contractors, engineers, or architects, these various stakeholders, ultimately what their role should be in the light of the law and what should be their criminal responsibilities. As for the roadmap, late last week I answered a question earlier on, actually follow-up question raised earlier, and I said that I hope next year, by early next year, we can have a more comprehensive proposal that actually would address, for example, other issues like the supply of materials, regulation of regulatory framework for materials, and so forth. So they will be covered in our next stage of work. And we will get feedback from the trade by then. Cheung Chi Wai next. Follow-up question Now you are, trying to identify who's responsible. You would lay charge within 6 months after discovery of the bridge, but now you're saying that the period can be extended. All moves to enhance public safety, of course, it comes with a cost, but it seems like you are transferring the cost totally to the workers once they've made a mistake. And the Water Supplies Department, however, is supposed to monitor the work, and once project is finished, you could go there because they will have submitted materials to you, information to you, and you should have monitored the entire project. So why is it that why didn't you allocate more resources, manpower to do the monitoring work so that the public can be better assured of their safety? So why can't you find out more whether problems have occurred instead of waiting till a problem has been discovered? Yes, I think an important point is that we hope the trade to know that they need to really comply with what's required by law. If people in the trade, when they do the plumbing works, if they follow strictly the legal requirements, they need not worry about any criminal liabilities afterwards. I think that's an important point. I also know the trade, since the Latin water scandal, has attached much importance to doing proper plumbing works. Our colleagues have actually communicated with them. Everyone knows that they need to do a better job. But as long as they follow the legal requirements, they need not worry whether, when a problem is discovered and when they will be held accountable. And secondly, even for our Water Supplies Department staff, when they do their inspections on site, we may not actually, for every plumbing parts, look at all the parts, 100% of them. They may not be able to do that. So ultimately, there could be scenarios where during the inspections, problems were undetected. So we need to see how we can strike a balance. That is, I think, Mr. Xiu, you're saying that, do we have to make it indefinite? That is 6 months since the discovery. What do you mean by since the discovery? Does it mean that it could mean a time frame of 10, 20 years? I know your point, but we are open to further discussion on that, on the time limit for prosecutions. Say maybe, some people suggested 6 years or 12 years. We can discuss that further in that. I think we need to be fair. Like Monday or Wednesday, some days we can send people to the site to carry out inspection. In terms of public interest, that the public is concerned, and if there is public worries, then you just send people down, allocate resources to get more people to the site to do inspection work. If not, then we are talking about social costs here. If you don't have a definite time frame or limit, and then hold the workers accountable indefinitely, then that's not fair. There could be some temporary staff who are hired to do the work, and they will have very little idea of what the entire project involves. So they will be very fed up if you hold them accountable. So I think there is a suggestion for 6 years. So I think you need to really seriously consider the time limit. And Chairman, can I keep asking? Okay.
Well, just now you talked about odd job workers, and I think the majority of deputations believe that you should allow them to get on-the-job experience, and you cannot always ask the licensed plumbers to actually carry out the works because of cost implications. Because if you ask the more lower-skilled workers to carry out the works, the cost will be lower. I think the majority of deputations agree, except Mr. Zhang. He believes that it is not fair. I'd like to listen to his explanation why he thinks it's not a good idea. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member. we're suggesting that because of the 70 plus LPs, we now come up with this bill. I suggest that we should include apprentices that are currently undergoing training. It is not really difficult to get this registration. I have this lady in my company weighing only slightly over 100 pounds, and she recently got a qualification of semi-skilled worker as well. It's not really difficult. Well, you did not consult our licensed plumber trade association. It's such a major change affecting us, but you consulted every other organization except ours. So I think there has been insufficient consultation. Another point is this. You mentioned skilled and semi-skilled workers. We say that they can only undertake works under the supervision of licensed plumbers. We're against this idea. I don't quite catch your point, Mr. Zhang, because Mr. Xiu's question is clear. He asked whether you oppose the current proposal, that is, for skilled and semi-skilled worker to work under the supervision of licensed plumber, because present legislation seems to suggest that the licensed plumber will be breaking the law if he doesn't undertake all the works himself. So this is a change. And he was asking for your view, and from what I understand, you seem to be agreeing to this because it is not really difficult to get a semi-skilled worker registration. But I really want to elaborate on my point. Maybe I was in such a hurry just now. We are being very reasonable. We need skilled and semi-skilled worker in this industry, so we're for that. All right, so your view is clear. But what about provisional worker? I think that the point about provisional worker is clear. We're not referring to temporary workers or odd job workers, but rather a special arrangement under the designated worker for designated trade arrangement. And the administration just now already explained that there are only some 70 provisional workers left at the moment, and this is a transitional arrangement for workers who have yet to obtain any registration. So I think that things are clear now, and Mr. Xiu also understands Mr. Zhang's point. All right, so I have another question. Mr. Zhang is suggesting that, he referred to the odd job workers, and is he suggesting that odd job workers should also receive training? So what courses and how long? The CITA also referred to this issue. You can organize a course for semi-skilled or skilled workers and for more licenses to be issued. We also hope that there are more courses under the designated workers for designated trade arrangement. Right. I think the deputations have made it clear that training is necessary, and I understand in practice there are training courses available, like some deputations mentioned. Third round, Dr. Helena Wong, 3 minutes. Well, just now, the government, it was mentioned that the government proposes to amend the time limit to 6 months after discovery of offense. I am in favor of that, but I want to know whether the prosecution time bar can be further extended to, say, 12 months. Another point, you mentioned that those workers and licensed plumbers may possibly be held liable forever. But this is counting from the date when the works are carried out. I think from the lead in water incident, what we learned is the following. For Chiang estate, the first estate discovered to have lead in water, just 1 or 2 years after completion of the development, it was discovered. But for Chau estate, It was redeveloped in 1998, and Unchao Estate was one of the estates affected, and it was discovered in 2015. So that means it took 7 years before it was discovered. I hope that deputations and members of the public can understand that the amendment is necessary. Unless we make sure that the proper gatekeeping should be implemented as soon as possible. But then if the administration makes a mistake, and then if 6 months has passed, then we cannot hold anybody accountable. Well, for those children living in the estates, they have consumed the contaminated water, and their IQ has been affected. Well, of course, we're not suggesting that the government can just sit on their laurels. The administration should do a proper gatekeeping job and involve all stakeholders. The government should not just deal with the issues and penalize the participants years after the incident has happened. Still, if there is no such amendment, I think it will undermine public health. I think at the clause-by-clause scrutiny stage, you will further consider this point. Mr. Peter Shiu, 3 minutes, third round. Thank you, Chairman. Now, about this bill, I want to emphasize that the administration has tabled the bill very hastily. Although the lead-in-water incident has occurred, well, just now the Licensed Plumber Trade Association mentioned a point, and they are the most important stakeholder because they're ultimately held responsible. So why didn't you consult them? Well, there are different stakeholders in the plumbing trade, and there are different associations in the plumbing industry. And for Mr. Zhang's union, well, the Hong Kong Licensed Plumbers Union Limited was set up not long ago, and we have been liaising with 5 other trade associations of the plumbing industry. And apart from the public consultation, we also held 2 public hearings. And I understand that Mr. Zhang's union also took part in our public consultation. So it cannot be said that we have not consulted their association. Now, about odd job workers, it is said that even for them, we need to give them opportunities to enhance their skills. But like I said just now, the more professional the workers are involved, then the higher the cost will be. So, well, with all the new requirements, do you think that the construction costs will go up or down? Who would like to take this question? Mr. Wong? Chairman, definitely the cost will be increased. By how much? Well, it depends on the final proposal of the administration. We can't estimate the cost unless it is implemented. Well, very simply, with more responsibilities on your shoulders, then definitely the cost will be increased. If you want to hold me accountable for 1 year, then the cost will be factored in. And if you ask me to be responsible for my whole life, again, the cost will be factored in as well. Ultimately, the cost will be transferred to the public. Let's say originally the department may have a few number of staff inspecting the process, but now there will be much more, and this is about costs to be paid by the taxpayers. And I think that the public need to consider very carefully how this balance should be struck. Mr. Chen? Well, I have heard views from members, etc. And I think that about the word provisional in Chinese, I think you should change the wording to something like 暫准 or 暫定. About the increasing cost, let me respond to Mr. Peter Shiu's point. We're at the drafting stage on designated trade for designated workers. After the lead in water incident was exposed, for the whole trade, the cost has been increased substantially. We need to use different materials, unlike before, and we need to conduct tests to comply with the new standards. And the price of materials have increased. Labor costs have also increased because of the designated trade for designated workers arrangement. And for odd job workers, namely general workers, not all workers are committed to self-enhancement. Some workers may like to hone their craft. Some short-term courses may be beneficial for them. But if you ask them to take up long-term courses under the Construction Industry Council, they may not be interested. I just want to explain the actual operation of the trade. Not every worker is interested in taking part in long-term training. So you should give people different opportunities. Some people may wish to stay in the industry, but they may not be interested in undergoing standardized training. So please understand the trade's practice. Right, there are different needs. Mr. Zhang. I think there is a way to do the job and not increase the cost. We talk about responsibilities here, but the government has not considered the authority responsible for issuing licenses. Should the government be held responsible as well? 6 years? Because we're partners, we should share the burden together. Why shouldn't the department be held responsible as well? I recall once the vessel capsized, the government official was also held responsible. I think that would be fairer. Chairman, over here. Can I respond to that? I see that another deputation has raised her hand, Ms. Lee. About the Water Supplies Department. Well, sorry, Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee. Well, this is not for deputations to raise questions. Are you trying to respond to Mr. Shiu's question? It's relevant, but I'd like to talk about Kaixing Estate. Some water taps used were not up to standard, and if the WSD was responsible for supervising the works, such that the licensed plumber should not be held liable for the areas of work they were not in charge in. Well, Ms. Lee, I'm sorry. Please, I need to direct you to discontinue your speech. I have emphasized once again that this is not for deputations to raise questions, and if you'd like to respond to members' questions, you can. Next, Dr. Chang Sheng-Guang. Now, about Mr. Shiu's point, I also need to comment on it, because in terms of construction cost of water supply and drainage, we're talking about 5%. Of course, this part of the cost will increase because of the heavier workload and the long processing time. Definitely, it will impose greater costs on the industry. But of course, we do make adjustments ourselves. We have been relying on R&D, robotics, prefabricated materials, such that in terms of plumbing and drainage, in the future we will have a totally different mode of operation. So when we considered this bill, we should give some flexibility. We should not be too rigid. We should not just put the blame on licensed plumbers without having regard to innovation and technology in the future. I'd like to respond to Mr. Chen Yuen. I agree with him, because for odd job workers, some of them may wish to undergo training and they may become engineers.
So but who will do it? Now there's all these regulations and liabilities and so forth. So the most important is cost. Cost will definitely go up, and that will be paid by the public. Okay, let me respond. I think in the trade, people doing various kinds of work, have different views about the prospects, and there are also cases where workers started from scratch ultimately and got the license as a licensed plumber. So there are quite a number of people who just started from scratch and became licensed plumbers. So it's not that not everyone likes to study. There are just different pathways. Okay, next one, Helena Wong, 4th round, 2 minutes. Chairman, I'd like to listen to Ms. Lee, what she wanted to say about materials and workers. Ms. Lee, please. Yes, further supplements here. The task force report done by the Water Supplies Department, they found in Kaijing Estate some water taps or parts. As found in the investigation, the level of lead found in taps of the copper alloy actually did not meet the requirement. And in the approval or information given on the materials and their discrepancies. So if the Water Supplies Department had a monitoring mechanism, why is it that the department couldn't identify the discrepancy in types of materials used? So who should be held responsible, the plumbers or the inspectors from the WSD? Well, this is not the time for asking questions, but still we'll refer these 2 questions. Okay, pass the ball to Mr. Mack. Thanks, Chairman, for passing the ball to me. As I just said, the law includes requirements that the water or the pipes should comply with certain requirements. Under the current law, the plumber are responsible, and they are supposed to use standard materials. But how do you know whether they've complied? Well, there are vetting procedures, and we're also using general acceptance mechanism. Sorry, Chairman, I think Mr. Mack didn't really answer. The question was, you said you have the vetting procedures and they need to get approval, but what happened in Kaijing Estate is that the pipes used were not the same brand as what you previously approved. The pipes were sourced from a different location than what the application claimed they were. So I was trying to answer the question, actually. When a project is completed, the plumbers need to let us know, and we required the licensed plumber and the authorized person to write to us to confirm that they've used materials that actually fit or they're the same as what were approved. After the lead and water scandal, the WSD has strengthened our final inspection work. That is, once we received a report of completion, our staff would be sent to the site and use nudging or the tool to check whether the right materials were used. How about the pipes? For the pipes, we'll check whether they have followed the requirements. We have labels to check whether the right materials or promised materials were used. After the lead and water scandal, we have stepped up our inspection. But as some deputations said, the process now involves a lot more procedures that the trade has to follow, and it does add to the costs of the trade. We understand that. But let me emphasize, we attach much importance to safe water and also use of right materials. At the same time, we don't want to, as Mr. Shiu just said, because of what happened, we don't want to increase the compliance cost in the trade. So we need to strike a balance. To do that, WSD and the trade have all along been in communication. Every time when there are new demands made, they would, if they want us to make new changes, they would actually have thorough discussions with us and with the trade. And we need to ensure water safety without adding too much to the cost of the trade. Next one, Cheung Chi Wai, the fourth time. Sorry. I think the hearing, after Mr. Shiu has asked the question, I think the hearing should finish because the deputations have been here for 2 hours, and then after they've left, we'll go back to our own scrutiny. We'll begin the scrutiny after they've left. Dr. Wong, why this ordinance actually covers the regulation of workers, and we spend a lot of time on whether professional staff need to attend courses. So, Chairman, could you arrange a meeting so that the administration can brief us on how workers enter the trade, where they can get training, to give us an overall picture? Because there are lots of modes. Some go to VTC, some goes to classes offered by Construction Industry Council, some goes to even the plumbing classes organized by FTU. So how many qualified trainers are there now? So can you invite the parties to come or let us know the information? And please invite the training organizations to tell us what are they training, who are they training. Yes. Okay, let's discuss it internally. Chairman, besides the Development Bureau, shouldn't we engage the Education Bureau or other bureaus who are involved in training of workers? Okay, we'll decide later on. But let's discuss later on because this session now is still part of the hearing. Mr. Shiu, please continue. Yes. As for the construction materials, the most important is, when you carry out a project, whether the materials are proper, whether the right ones are used. Construction materials, are provided by suppliers. I'm sure in the past they follow BS standards. Sorry, let me declare, I have a business in construction materials. So they have the BS to follow. So the suppliers, how much, what materials they've sent to the site, everything is known. So you wouldn't spend much time doing visual inspection. So my point is, if you send more people to the site, that would help actually avoiding problems to occur in the first place, and instead of waiting till problems are discovered later on. So why don't you just arrange for more people to be doing the inspection on site? Just spend more days doing inspection. Why not? Or You can carry out inspection by phases. I know you're talking about increased costs, but now that we're having a new amendments, you can be prepared for increased costs, because we don't want to see new problems occurring again. We don't want to see a repeat of what happened. Another key point today is the technical staff. I think you should make it clear to the trade earlier on who should and what are the responsibilities of the workers. If they could be criminally liable, then criminal offenses could be a very much a discouraging factor to workers. If there's so many jobs out there, they may not want to take the risk. So you need to give the potential workers a clearer idea. What offenses could they be liable for? So you need to let the public know, what the amendments are really about. You need to do the planning early on, because the ordinance has not been revisited for decades. So you need to let the people know what they should expect. Without Dr. Wong, we wouldn't know, the huge scale of the problem. Administration, please, after the meeting, please, on the deputations' views expressed today, provide us with the written reply. Okay? So thank you, deputations, for coming, and individuals for coming. So you may excuse yourself now. Can I supplement? Mr. Lau? Okay, want to speak, right? Mr. Lau? Yeah, sorry. Can I speak for the last time? Yeah. Sorry. Well, at the previous session, after you spoke, it was the turn for the administration to respond and members to ask questions, and we have spent quite a lot of time on the issue already. If you're not responding to members' questions, you're not supposed to speak any further. Okay, that's the rule. But I just want to respond. If you have further views, you're welcome to write to us. Write to the committee. But he wants to respond to what I just said, right? Mr. Lau, you want to respond. You want to respond to what Mr. Shiu just said, right? Okay. Okay. Please go ahead then, Mr. Lau. Yeah, just that Mr. Shiu was saying about the criminal offenses for practitioners in the trade. Just then we heard that. Well, there have been a change indeed in the amendments, because under the current ordinance, everyone doing plumbing works needs to be LP. If you're not an LP and doing plumbing works, you'll be criminally liable. But now you allow other people to enter the trade, and they all could be criminally liable. But please don't forget that 14.3 refers to not just the use of leaded soldering materials. Even if you are using other improper materials, you could be liable for breaching 14.3. So with the amendments, are there any other, what about the liabilities for other construction workers? What sorts of liabilities could they be in for? Not just plumbing workers, but how about other types of workers? What sort of offenses could they be liable for? Mr. Zhang? To be short, members, please save us licensed plumbers. It's very difficult for us to make a living. If you are putting so much responsibilities on us, additional responsibilities on us, members, please, I beg you, please don't hold us liable for life. Thank you, Mr. Shiu. Mr. Shiu, for a suggestion. You wanted to save us from being worried about having committed an offense. It's really unfair for us to be fearful of committing an offense for 90 years.
Ms. I want to supplement on the point of 6 months time limit. For the 6 month time bar, this is not something new in this Waterworks Amendment Bill. This is the same for lift and escalator safety ordinance and guest house accommodation ordinance. When it comes to safeguarding the safety of drinking water for the public, it is necessary for the WSD to be able to institute prosecution 6 months after discovery offense. It should not be fixed at 6 years. Thank you, deputation, for coming. You may be excused. We've spent 2.5 hours, and we've heard many valuable views, which will be very useful in our work in scrutinizing the bill. Thank you. If there are further views, you're welcome to make written submissions to the Bills Committee. I think that we can take a very short break and come back at 11:40 for the next session of the meeting.